Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. If you're a regular listener, you know that we most often feature musicians on the show, but we're always happy when creative people in other fields share a chat too, especially when they've had the kind of interesting careers that today's two guests have. Now, Haley Joel Osment made a permanent mark on pop culture when he uttered the words, "I see dead people" in 1999's The Sixth Sense, made when he was just 10 years old. The line still reverberates today. Just listen to Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. Osment was nominated for an Oscar for his role as a psychic kid, and he has had a fruitful, relatively low-key acting career since. No scandals, no big blockbusters, just a bunch of really interesting work. As you'll hear in this podcast, he's fully down to earth about his unusual journey, even ready to find a tiny bit of positivity in the recent LA fires, which completely destroyed his and his parents' house. He's chatting here with his actor-comedian friend Matt Walsh, who's probably best known for playing Mike McClintock opposite Julia Louis-Dreyfus on Veep. It was the perfect vehicle for Walsh, who made his name as an improv comedian in Chicago before his troupe, Upright Citizens Brigade, which also features Amy Poehler, took their show to New York. Walsh is one of those guys who brings the funny to every movie and TV part he's in. If you don't recognize his name, you'll certainly recognize his face. The reason these two came together today is that a movie they co-starred in is just coming out. It's called Not an Artist, and it's an ensemble comedy about a group of artists who gather at a mysterious retreat organized by no less than the RZA to decide whether they're actually cut out to be artists. It's available on demand now, and it's really funny. These two chat not only about Not an Artist, but also about Osment's experience with the LA fires, about Walsh's Chicago background, weird Airbnbs, the magic of David Mamet's dialogue, and lots more. It's a good one. Enjoy.
All right. Hi, Haley.
Hey, man. How's it going?
I've been so wanting to connect with you. I know you've been displaced after the recent Los Angeles fires. I won't go in deep, but how are you?
Yeah, myself and my parents both lost our houses to the Eaton fire. So we've been staying with my sister, who luckily was in a different part of town and was not affected by evacuations or anything. So we're good. We're safe. All the living creatures in the house are safe, which is the most important thing. And I think it was like 160,000 people have been displaced by this. So it's the whole city really suffering at the same time. And it is going to be one of the good things is that everybody I've talked to in my neighborhood and friends, everybody intends to rebuild and try and bring our city back. But it's going to be years. Just the cleanup alone will probably take more than 2 years because of the scale of the destruction. So it's going to be settling in for a long commitment to do that, which I don't think anybody had been planning to do at the start of 2025. So we'll be good, though.
I'm sorry. That must be so brutal. I can't even imagine. And you sent me a video of your home, and I didn't understand it. Like, have you been back since? Is it too painful to go back?
No, it's not too painful. It's just for listeners, for the timeline, I was really close to the where the Eaton fire started. So my house, I think, was probably destroyed within a few hours of the Eaton fire starting. I think by the middle of the night on the first day of the fires, it was probably gone. My parents were farther west than my house was. Their house was destroyed in the morning of the next day. And I had time to get some stuff out of my house. And then I went over to my parents' house, which was on a much larger street than mine, which felt like it was going to be a perimeter that the firefighting would happen on. And that did not end up being the case. Resources were stretched really thin. And now I'm reading in the LA Times that the firefighting command post was moved 3 times in the first night. I didn't see a fire truck, even when I returned the next day, which is the video I sent you, was driving all through Altadena. And by that time, downtown was on fire. My house was completely destroyed. And, it looked like, a bomb had gone off. The fire just burned so hot and fast that I was able to walk around in my neighborhood and then see that it was gone and see that my parents' house was gone. And then just to leave, I drove down Lake. That was honestly the most surreal part, because when you live in a house that's up close to the mountains in LA, you expect the fire risk. The Bobcat fire in 2020 right when I moved in, got close to getting into my neighborhood. But the fact that it was all these urban areas way far away from the mountains, the wind was so intense that it had blown and destroyed parts of town that you would never think would be at risk like that. I had been shooting in Palmdale, and I got home at like 6 o'clock, and the whole day everybody's like, wow, these winds are gonna be dangerous. And I had been concerned. I was like, oh, trees are gonna be falling. I gotta make sure, I pull everything down. The power's probably gonna go out. And then right when I got home, I let the dogs out in the backyard, and I got a text from somebody saying there's an Eden Canyon fire. And I just looked up, and it was there. Like, there was a big plume of smoke, and you could see the glow on it. It was just like, you just instantly know that it's possible that everything's going to get destroyed. But the speed of it still surprised me. So I got, hard drives and passports and stuff like that. And I took a bunch of frames off the wall. But I think my preparedness backfired a little bit, because my first carload I felt really good about. And I kind of wish I'd been more in a panic and gone back into the house and started looking for stuff. Because now there's some things that were sitting out where I was like, that would have been nice to have. And just, personal possessions is, it's whatever, but the artifacts from the past, notes and little, just these little things, that's the stuff that you just have to have a new mindset going forward with, because you don't have that anymore. So, and the fact that my parents' house was also destroyed, so it was the whole family archive in one night.
I thought of your Dodger bobblehead collection.
yeah, that one, it's such a silly thing, but I was like, it's weird, the stuff. Oh, and my scorebook too, going back, like, it's not, important stacked up against other stuff, but it's that stuff that, it's going to remind you in the future, going like, I got to start all that over again.
Well, yeah. I have, unfortunately, too many people who went through what you did. And it seems like a life of like, every day is like, oh no, I don't have that anymore. Like, it's just a life for a while of realizing like, no, don't have that anymore. Like you go, maybe I'll go cut the grass. No, I don't have a lawn or a lawnmower.
And I don't have scissors, or like, I need to like staple these sides together. You're like, like it's just down to the tiniest little thing. And I'm trying to, with all of it, take it in a positive direction, where it's like, with clothes and stuff, it's like, how much do I actually need? I bet I could have a really small closet of stuff and get by on that, and that's liberating in a way. But things like books and the records and the little collectibles, you're like, at one point you have to learn to let it go, but also it's like, well, I kept those things because they meant something.
A lot of people have emotional connection to physical things. It's not abnormal. That's how we document our lives. There was one family we met recently. They lost their home, and then they went she checked on her parents, and her parents had lived there for 45 years in the same house. And they had this vintage car collection, which is all gone. But she went to check on her parents, and she assumed they were fine. And they were just paralyzed with fear, sitting on the couch. Just frozen. And she's like, we have to go. And then they couldn't find the car keys. But it was also like an irrational reaction that the daughter, who had also lost her home, didn't expect. And that's crazy to me. Like, that's just like, wow, that's really hard. But well, I'm glad you're safe, and I'm glad your parents are safe. And we don't have to like talk about that forever. But I understand you're an actor.
Yes, sir. I'm choosing this moment to, get into the acting game, gonna go to Hollywood and
this is going to be great for LA production, right? This is really good for LA production.
I hope so.
It might be.
Go either way.
You're right.
If there's a Marshall Plan attitude to it of like, look, this is total destruction. Let's get in there and
let's dig in and rebuild. I agree with you. I do have one sort of interviewer question. I'm sorry, I'm not usually, because on these podcasts, it's usually like a cool rock and roll artist, and then some actor gets to ask questions. So I'm not really bringing a lot of the cool factor, but
yes, you are.
All right, I'll take that as a compliment. I'm not fishing, but I do have a legit interviewer question, which is, as someone who's had a long career in film, how do you keep film intriguing for yourself? Like, in other words, I can crush a spaghetti dinner and knock it out for the kids and Morgan and like blast it out. But after a while, I'm like, I got to shake it up. I can't, you know what I mean? And so you're someone who's like stepped into movies and told stories since you were young. How do you reinvigorate yourself to stay, excited?
Unpredictable nature of our business, and often how quickly you go from not even having heard of a project to you're in a different city doing it like the next week. Like that happens so much that just being on your and even stuff with with reading for things or projects that you're doing where it's like, can you have like, and they're not supposed to do this anymore because of the strike, I think. But it's like, hey, like, can you have these 10 pages ready like now? And there's a part of me that's like, well, it's not supposed to the way it's supposed to be. But I do like that challenge of, pushing myself to see, to do something well and to do it right. And film has you do that with your hand tied behind your back or in, new circumstances, working with people you never met before, weird hours. And the challenge of it is just still really interesting for me. Just to wrap up, that is, as you get older, you're like, wow, all the books I want to read, I have to start thinking about the ones I'll actually have the time to read over the course of my life. And I feel like that with roles and with seeing movies too. And it's like, there's so much that I want to get the chance to do that it just gets me excited to go to work every day. Cause I never really set super specific goals for myself in this industry, but there are things where it's like, I'd love to have, I've done 100 movies or direct this many movies. It's, an odyssey that I want to go on.
So as you get older, you sort of see the limited opportunities you have, as well as maybe structuring things that you make sure you do at least once. That's also part of it.
Yeah. It's, I think it was John Lennon. It's like, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And boy, do we do that in this industry a lot, where you're like, God, I spent the last year developing this thing, and a little pandemic or a little strike just tossed it in the trash. So I think for me, it just redoubles my motivation to get stuff over the finish line.
Yeah. I'm sort of the opposite world. I'm terrible at making plans because I'm an improviser by trade. I sort of easily distracted and good at being present, but not necessarily productive. I'm not perfect at being present, but that's an area of growth for me, if I'm being honest, to be more thoughtful in my choices. Is this therapy? This is therapy, right? Do you have a degree?
I'm also very easily distracted, and like I live with like Post-its and little lists on my phone and everything, because I do need like physical reinforcement to keep me on track, or I will go down some rabbit hole of something that wasn't the plan for the day. So yeah, it's weird because what you described, with it, that as an improviser, you're a master at it, being present. Like, yeah, that's constantly in conflict with thinking ahead and trying to plan.
Well, speaking of improv, I wanted to talk about Not an Artist, and that's a film we're both in that I sort of pressured you into coming out into the San Bernardino Mountains with the cherry on top of getting to meet Wu-Tang's The RZA. So I didn't have to do much sweet talking, but you jumped into a project for no money for 2-3 weeks up in the middle of the mountains of San Bernardino. I think the first vaccine had just been delivered to all of us. So we were just coming out of our hibernation of COVID. And my first observation was you were so strong at just coming out of the gates with a perfectly passionate character choice. You were an artist who had come from money and they were struggling, and you just had all this backstory and you were just dropping lots of gems, which is what you need in an improvised movie. You had full commitment out of the gate, which a lot of people, I've been in improvised projects, I've directed a couple, a lot of people, maybe myself, are sort of tenuous and like sort of, it takes them a while to kind of own what they're doing. They're just sort of timid and unsure. And I've even seen really famous actors on projects who are like, I don't really know how to improvise. I really need you guys to write me something.
I'm a big fan of watching improvised stuff, and I feel like I've been the beneficiary of being around at a time where there is so much good improv and, all over the place, and so many good podcasts and live shows, and you see its influence on, traditional TV and films. So there's been a lot of people that I've learned from, including yourself. And we have a scene in 2013 Sex Ed, which was I think like the first time I'd done like a filmed improvised scene. And like, that was a really important turning point for me because, that was, it's just this one little scene we have in the credits, but it's really fun working that way. And I hadn't really done that a lot before. And now I have had the opportunity to do it quite a bit with you guys. So it's just a blast.
And so for the movie, once you knew you were going to be playing like a rich painter who was struggling with success and the curse of their sort of wealth, let's say, did you do a lot of research? Did you have little nuggets? Did you write a little character diary? How did you get into it?
Yeah, finding those nuggets of just not getting too specific or restrictive with it, but just finding like a general history of just where he had been from, geographically, what his parents were like, what his art was like, and then seeing how that bounced off of everybody I'd be in scenes with. I like that he had all this desire to truly not just be good, but to be one of the greats, and just the talent lagged so far behind it, and like the frustration of that, and that he was, happy to be there, but if things didn't turn out great immediately, he's like, I'm gonna cash in my check and kill myself. It's like, oh, okay, that's what that kind of that Silicon Valley mindset where it's like, if I am not making $1 billion in 6 months, why am I even doing anything?
Which is so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what a cool group of people we had up there in that, I guess it's the San Bernardino Mountains. It was near Big Bear.
Yeah.
And we had this beautiful drive up there every day. And a lot of the people were staying at the camp. I was staying. I feel like I should have done that now, looking back. I took an Airbnb in town without realizing I was right next to the only highway in and out of Big Bear. So 4:00 in the morning, you'd have like tractor trailers going like 3 feet from my head. I was like, and it was the funniest little house, very nice and like very homey and like kind of Christian, like nice, normal things in the main room. But the bedroom I stayed in, because I had the most comfortable bed, it was like the problem child had gotten, they're like, you can design your room. Because there are these like weird sexual paintings and the carpet was red and all the walls were dark red. And it was like a like nice Sunday, post-church brunch Airbnb, but with one room that was like the brothel. I wanted to know the story of who lived there.
Yeah. Airbnbs, you do walk into rooms or places and you're like, what is happening? Like my brother rented one out in Joshua Tree and there was like a dead rooster out back and some strange guy ended up knocking on the door because he was there to fix something, but he had overalls and no shirt. And then there was like, the woman was sort of a violinist, but there was pictures of her playing naked violin. And then it was also a number, like she had parties there for people to play instruments naked. So it just created this whole, and they just basically got out of Dodge at some point. It was too many connections to like bad juju.
Yeah. I go with a bunch of friends to Dodger spring training a lot of years, and we had a bunch of people staying in this house, and there was a little photo on the wall of this huge family in the yard. So we took a photo of all of us in the same position and then put it behind that photo, hoping that someday someone's like, what the fuck?
This is why you don't Airbnb your house that you want to live in. And also don't ever let film crews shoot in your home.
Don't do it,
because it will be disrespected.
Yeah. Somebody's going to kick a hole in the wall to feed some cable through.
Yeah. And then they'll put chalk on the wall to cover it up. There was a house when we were filming UCB in New Jersey, the sketch show. And the person who lived there was excited and they were there all day. And there were some paintings on the wall that I think were homemade that at some point, because we're comedians, we started narrating, I don't know, not friendly things about the paintings. And the person who was the painter was walking around the house and they may have heard us at some point. And I'm like, we're jerks, don't let jerks in your house. Like you're a guest. Like as an actor, if you're on location, you never feel like a guest. You feel like it's your place, but you are a guest and you better be careful. So if you're an actor
love
listening to this,
Yeah, like if you're trying to go find a place to look at the mini sides, it's like, no, this is my room. This is my space right now. This is my child.
this is my red room with weird sexual art. Get out of here.
This is where 50 Shades of Grey was written. Get out of here.
I think there was a porn set filming across when I first moved to LA. They just instantly blocked all the windows and there was people in robes coming in and out. I'm like, that's a porn. And so I talked to one of the ADs. I'm like, is this a porn? He's like, no. It's like, and I'm like, all right, wait, you're filming a porn. What am I going to do? Yeah.
They got to shoot him somewhere.
They kept the house clean and whatever. It was fine. Did you always live in Altadena or did you hop around LA before you settled out there?
When I was born, my family lived in Tahunga, and then when I was 4, we moved to Glendale, where I think I lived the most years growing up. And I went to high school and lived part of the time, the latter years of high school in La Cañada. And then when I turned 18, I moved to New York, and I lived there until 2020, which is when I moved to Altadena. So I've been in Altadena for like 5 years. And my parents had moved there in like 2014, and I would not have thought to look there had they not been enjoying it so much. And I had a lot of friends whose families had grown up there when I was growing up, but for some reason I was just looking in different parts of LA when I was looking for a house, and I moved back from New York, and I was like, oh, of course, Altadena. It's beautiful trees and great community, and it is. Yeah, now we gotta build it back up. Christmas Tree Lane didn't burn down. Somehow that's still there.
That's a Christmas miracle.
It is.
Did you love New York when you were living there?
Oh yeah, it's so funny because I would move back there if ever work, whenever work requires it. It got to the point after, in around 2018, 2019, where I was just shooting in LA, shooting in Toronto, shooting in Vancouver way more than I was ever shooting in New York. And I was like, all right, I'll be responsible, move back to Los Angeles. Like, you choose that as a home base, and like that's the more reasonable thing to do. And then it was pandemic, so trapped inside the house. And then it was strike. And then I was like, great, like after the strike, it's like, let's get back to work. I've actually, come to love this place more than anywhere I've ever lived. And then it all burned down. So then maybe back to New York now. I went and did a play, my friend's play, which was called Midnight Coleslaw last June at the Tank in New York. And I don't know if you do this, but like sometimes you do it with flights too, where you're like, I'll find a deal, or like it's like, instead of just getting a hotel, you'll be comfortable at it. It's like, why not find a cool place? Or like, I stayed at the Pod Hotel because I was going to be at the theater all day. And I was like, I don't need to be renting getting a big hotel room or anything. And I stayed at the Yotel in Hell's Kitchen, which is clean and nice and everything. However, it was 95 degrees the whole time I was there. And I was waking up in the middle of the night, and it was, 80 something in the room, pouring sweat. I was like, God, I'm turning on the air conditioning. What's going on? And eventually I got so frustrated. I went up and like took the cover off the unit, and there's a little sticker that's like, don't worry, the air conditioning is triggered when the motion sensor in the room is triggered. Now it's like, are you fucking kidding me? So unless you're going like this, the air conditioning turns off, as in if you go to sleep, the air conditioning
turns off.
So it turns off in the room. And I was like, I don't like this policy very much. And even in that terrible, sweaty, cramped confines, going back and doing a play there, I was like, this is just the best. I just love living there so much.
Yeah.
It's a great way of life.
It is for a theater actor too. It's the best. You can walk to work. And I did a little responsible homework. I kind of skimmed your IMDb before we talked. And you did American Buffalo there in New York.
That's right. Yeah. In 2008, me and John Leguizamo and Cedric the Entertainer was a really great experience. We did not have a very long run, but being on Broadway is really cool. I'd like to do some more of that in the future.
One more question. What was it like capturing the Mamet rhythm? Because like I said, I'm mostly an improv guy, sketch, came out of Chicago, moved to New York, did 8 years in New York. I've been in LA for 20. And Morgan, my wife, is she went to the American Dramatic Academy, I think it's called. And she convinced me to take this class with our friends like June, Raphael, and Casey Wilson. Long story short, it was like a serious acting class, which I hadn't really did a little bit in Chicago. And I had to do Mamet's Oleana. Somehow I got paired up with a woman to do the Oleana thing. And my take on Mamet is it's a lot of like, did you open the door? I opened the door. Well, what kind of door? It was the door. Are you doing the door or you're not doing the door? I'm doing the door. Can I finish my sentence? Well, you said door, but was it a door? Like, it's that type of dialogue, which is really hard to master because the differentiation is hard. So long story short, I was doing the scene, but I was basically paraphrasing at some point. And afterwards, like, the class gives notes, and my wife Morgan's like, I don't think he knew all the words. Like, she totally threw me under the bus.
No.
I felt like he was paraphrasing at times. I'm like, yeah, I was, because it's hard. All that's to say, how did you step inside of Mamet? How did you find that process?
I like that stuff. The pace of it, and the word perfectness and pause perfectness of it is a cool challenge. I definitely had the fewest lines of all the characters in that play. But yeah, it's kind of like, I forget if I'm a theater major, I should be able to talk in more detail about this. But I know that Pinter and him were friends, and with Pinter, it's all about those pauses. The rhythm and the meter of it is very, very specific. And in reading his books about theater and about film too, you're just like, man, the amount of text that this guy has absorbed over his life is pretty intimidating. One of the crew members on the production I did of American Buffalo had like coffee with him or something for his show, and she was giving him her number, and he said this like weird like cryptic phrase. She's like, "What's that?" He's like, "Oh, I created a mnemonic sentence of all the numbers in your telephone number." It's like, "Oh, okay, that's the sort of person we're dealing with this stuff." Word and number games encoded and everything.
He spent a lot of time in Chicago, and he listened to like cab drivers and bartenders, and like he loved the local dialect of Chicago, whatever, vernacular. And so he captured a lot of that and continues to have a very specific rhythm.
I love reading about how, like, until the middle of the 20th century, there were super distinct accents in each borough in New York. Like, that's how, tribal thing, not tribal, but like, now everything is so globalized, everybody kind of talks in that flat American way without any of the specific weird things. So when you find accents like that, it's really it's a really fun color.
Well, do you know what I love phrases too? Like, do you know what a Chicago tune-up is?
Wait, that's not what Bob Odenkirk does in Better Call Saul, right?
What is it?
Where he takes a shit through the sunroof or something?
No. That does have a name, but no, I forget what that's called. But no, a Chicago tune-up is like, I heard it from a Chicago guy. He was saying he's a bar owner, and there was a guy who was mouthing off by the pool tables, and a couple of the guys playing pool were Chicago cops. So they took him outside and gave him a Chicago tune-up, which is like they gave him a beatdown.
Yeah.
That's an amazing phrase. So I do love learning like local slang or whatever, but
absolutely. Where in the Chicago area did you grow up?
So originally like South Side, 103rd and Kedzie, and then when I was like 10 or 11, we moved to southwest suburbs, which were Downers Grove, Westmont, Darien, and then went to Northern Illinois for college. And then post-college, I lived in Wrigleyville, Boys Town, all those areas.
Nice.
North Side. Yeah.
I have done my research on you too. I've read at least 2 books about you. So I know a lot of the history. I read your book too. Did you and Besser write that? The UCB manual?
With Ian.
Well, with Ian, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another like oral history about UCB that I was reading, and there's a passage that I really loved about you where they're saying in the early UCB days, they're like, for a lot of people really try and put out this aura that they don't care what people think, and they're like, only Matt Walsh truly didn't care what people think. That's very inspiring.
Wait a minute, what book is this? I don't know this book.
They're like high. No, it was somebody at the time, and they were just like, he'd wear like Marlboro t-shirt, like a huge cowboy hat. And they're like, that guy truly doesn't give a shit what people think. I was like, I know that guy. I love that guy.
That's true. It doesn't always serve you, but as a young man, you can get. Yeah, I wore like bowling shoes and pajama bottoms, and I did not care, and I cloaked it under the guise of punk rock. But
well, I'm very envious, of that era and seeing that stuff, because I know that culture exists in some form these days, but a lot of those, I don't know, it feels like a lot of the intensity of it has been sanded down just by the way we live these days, and like having those kind of super intense scenes seems like something that would have been a thrill to live through.
Well, it is, in some ways, it was a pocket in a microculture a little bit. You know what I mean? There was no internet to sort of communicate it out or influence others. The only place you could do, say, long form was in Chicago.
Yeah.
So it did exist as a bubble for a while, but now it's proliferated. So for me, it was the best city to practice a trade, because there is an audience that supports the arts, and it's cheap in terms of being an artist. It's not like New York expensive, and you kind of focus on the work in the best way. You just kind of do the work. Like Second City was kind of the brass ring that we all tried to get to, I guess, or that brought people there forever. But you were just trying to impress your peers in the best way, and just trying to make a name for yourself, have your sketch group be the biggest fish in that little pond.
Yeah.
And truthfully, I didn't have plans. I didn't have a master plan. I just sort of went to where I was doing things that I was good at, and people I liked, and people that made me laugh. I don't know what else I would have done. I was a psych major. I did do psychology for about 2.5 years post-college.
Yeah.
I was going to be a psychologist, but that's hard.
That is hard. I bet that all gives you good insight into people, though.
I don't know that it does. Like, I feel like I learned a lot about disturbed disorders and weird human pathologies, and I was exposed to like teenagers from 12 to 20 with really disturbing personality manifestations, from schizophrenia to eating disorders, anorexia to like bipolar, seeing kids have a psychotic break.
Oh man.
And so that stuff is really hard to watch, but also I don't know that experience translates to me getting a script for a drama.
I was thinking more the classroom side of it, of talk about that. No, that with those individual stories of the people that you work with. I mean, my mom's an educator and taught 6th grade for the last 30 years, and you just see a lot of kids that you try and help as much as you can, but you also see a lot of tragic situations too, either from the circumstance they're in or some of these conditions that people have. I just did a movie with a character that had schizophrenic tendencies, and doing that research, it's really tough because it's such a constellation of symptoms, and so much of it is hidden until you reach a certain age in your life. It really makes you, it's just, you feel for people that have to deal with it. But what's interesting now, I mean, so often social media and YouTube is such a negative thing. But with this, I was seeing a lot of people who have channels talking through their symptoms, and people connecting and, finding common ground about when certain things would happen. It was really, really interesting about people who were, suffering from very serious symptoms, but filming themselves and then talking about it, and then commenting on videos of themselves, explaining what they were hearing and all that stuff. It's really fascinating. It's potentially a really good resource for a lot of people too.
And as a way that would eventually lead them into getting treatment?
It's like lifelong supportive care, and it's often a moving target. Sadly, is that the stuff that works is often really expensive and really involved, because it messes with your sense of reality, and it takes a lot of resources to hold on to that. Everybody's different. Everybody has different experience, but the really serious cases, it is totally possible for people to, have good outcomes, but it takes a lot of resources to do that. And, sadly, we live in a country that isn't interested in providing that most of the time. So and sometimes people, when they're doing well, they're like, "Oh, I don't need my meds. I don't need these. I'm doing great." And it's like, well, you're doing great because you're on a
therapeutic level of this cocktail. It's very precarious. And we're by the way, if you're listening to this, Haley and I are experts on
Matt has
psychology.
a degree. Matt has
a bachelor's degree, a bachelor of arts. I have a bachelor of arts and a few courses towards a master's, but that's it.
I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts. My diploma is one of the things that survived the fire. And it's because every time you go into an audition, they're like, well, what degree do you have? And you go, Bachelor of Fine Arts.
What does that mean? What does a fine arts degree mean?
It means I went to the theater. It's fine. It's the finest of arts. You know, it's up there with music, painting. You know.
Because I think fine arts makes me think of like a Renaissance program that you did a little bit of sculpture and a little bit of music, but it's just theater.
You know, sometimes I do wish I could just pause time, and I would love to take a class of, ceramics and stuff like that. And ours was sort of a conservatory, but we also took academic classes where, like I studied medieval theater and we did a little bit of Shakespeare, and you're like, God, I just wish I had the years to plug into all of these and finish all of these lines of study. What year did you move to New York with UCB?
96.
96.
March.
Fun time in New York.
Oh my God. Giuliani had taken the reins of the city and they were just starting to clean it up, but it was still dicey. I ended up living on 9th Avenue where they sort of had kicked all the Times Square riffraff. Because New York was pretty rough into the 90s too. When we landed, it was just starting to turn, and some of the elements of that whole 42nd Street was still lingering on the outskirts. But New York was amidst this alternative comedy boom, whatever word that means, whatever it means to be alternative comedy. But so we landed at the right time and we're plugged into all these people who eventually welcomed us from Janine Garofalo, David Cross, all the people you could just imagine running around New York. And then we benefited from our timing and ultimately landed with long form improv, and nobody in New York was doing long form. So we benefited from showing them this, it was like Marco Polo bringing noodles back from his Silk Road journey back to Italy. So we benefited from that as well. But it was I always feel like New York, if you could bring it to New York, you could sell it. There's just an audience for it. If you could get yourself situated in New York and put up a show, you could find an audience for it, Yeah. And we did. We really benefited from that. And we benefited from the love of other people who befriended us and people hungry to learn what we were doing, this magic trick. Nobody knew it. Yeah. So we gathered steam through a lot of, people we connected with right away.
We're talking about how to keep film interesting for yourself and everything. With improv, it's new every time and every night, but are there specific things you find yourself wanting to challenge yourself with, since you have so much experience in it now? There are things that, you want to push yourself into new areas of the form?
Well, one way I do that is through the film, like we did Not an Artist.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm shoehorning promotion, but I rarely
available on streamers everywhere.
Where you get your movies. VOD. Yeah. The RZA, the greatest icon, an American treasure. My God.
Yes, sir.
We got to meet him. Doing improv for dramatic moments is something I never do. I'm always looking for creating a comedic moment, then sustaining it. And dramatic improv, which is what is inside this film as well, was new to me. And I happened to see a film that Jeremy and Alexi did, and it was more dramatic. And I'm like, how about we try a collab? And so that's one way I do it. And then in terms of live performing, the best thing about improv is talking to the audience, quite honestly. Scene work, I'm still pretty good at, and I try to not do the same scene. That's the improviser's curse. It's you do a funny scene and then you leave the stage or you go back to the back wall and you're kind of I've done that scene before. You know what I mean? You're sort of knocking yourself, and you got to let go of that because it is a disposable art form. You just got to go, well, you tried. But it's also fun to just talk to the audience and see where they're at, what they're about, because it kind of keeps you relevant and keeps you grounded in people in the world in a really interesting way, because you use that material to explore scenes with it. And so I like the audience engagement that's inherent in improv, and that excites me still. But I also do cling to familiar faces. I don't want to go and do a show. I don't know. I have done them, but with people who are like, I don't know, novices and 25 and they're just starting out, or even people who are really good that I've never played with, I tend to not seek that out.
It's so cool to see shows like that where you know that there are these relationships going back decades, and like there's a shorthand, and like that deep connection just really adds so much to the show because you know all each other's strengths and everything. What you were saying about the curse of doing a scene that you feel like you've done before, I now really am trying to be hard on myself of catching like any kind of like tricks that you use, like certain reaction to things. Like if it's too similar to something that I've used with another character, it's like, okay, I got to like break out of that physicality or break out of that angle or like sitting a certain way. Like once you have a lot of years behind you, it's always very disappointing when you find yourself doing something that's too similar to something you've done in the past.
But especially if it's like a gesture where you're doing this with your hands, like you keep raising both hands. It's like, dude, what is that? Like you need to figure out how to hold a prop while you're doing a monologue.
Yeah.
but there's also the journey of accepting who you are. Like, this is my vessel. This is my life. This is my experience. Like, I'm going to play dads. I'm going to play office dudes. I'm going to play jerk bosses. Like, that's okay too. And in some ways, you know, Harrison Ford is always playing Harrison Ford, isn't he? But he's wonderful. But he's wonderfully interesting.
Yeah.
And he's committed, but he might be a cowboy in 1923 and he might be in the future on the Millennium Falcon, but he's still he's kind of just Harrison Ford, but he's awfully interesting to watch, isn't he?
Yeah.
And so there's part of acting, I think you just kind of accept the tricks, or you accept what you got, the vessel of it all. And that sometimes does us service too, by not beating ourselves up so much. Like, this is what I do.
Who was it Anthony Hopkins or damn it, I can't place the story, but somebody was working with a figure of that stature on like a Marvel movie, and they saw this guy's script and he'd put NAR just written over certain pages. The guy's like, what's that? He's like, no acting required. Like, just don't do anything here. You don't need to. It's just Marvel exposition.
Well, that is like I think of people like Kevin Dunn, who was on Veep. He could play a comedy moment or a dramatic moment with such gravitas. It could be either side of that coin, but he was always just kind of like, didn't seem like he was too acty ever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a really appreciable talent. I have one story that is not mine, but I think you'll like it. It's about it made me think about acting. My friend, I don't know if you know my friend Jim Underdown. He was when he first landed here, he's a Chicago guy. He was doing carpentry, and he roped in one of my buddies, Pete, who's an actor, to make his way when he landed in LA to do carpentry and cabinetry. And so they were working at Anthony Hopkins' house. And one day, and Anthony Hopkins, sweet old man, would just spend all day in like a robe or, you know, casual wear, drinking tea and reading scripts. Like, he was an actor. He was just a studious actor. And one day my friend Jim saw Anthony crossing through the room they were working, putting cabinets in. And he goes, hey, Tony, I want you to meet my friend Pete. And he's like, oh, and Anthony like looks up from his script. He's like, oh, hello, Pete. And Jim goes to Tony Hopkins. He goes, oh, Pete's an actor too. And Anthony Hopkins goes, tough business, and just left the room. Like, didn't want to entertain any more conversation about it. Which is just wonderful.
That's so good.
Do you have, of all, because you've worked with like icons, if you will, directors, actors, do you have a good story? This is so putting you on the spot, by the way, or a learned lesson from one of the greats that you got to work with, either side of that.
I think and I felt so lucky because working with with Spielberg, for example, it was over many, many months. So you just kind of absorb the pace and the feeling on a set like that. And you're like, this is a nice way to work, not just because they have so many, monetary resources, but just because that's the way he wants to run a set. Like, everybody is trusted to be very good at their job. He's obviously incredibly prepared for everything, but he gives himself that room to walk onto the set when everybody's in costume or ready to go, and to be inspired to put the camera somewhere else. Like, all the great directors had that kind
spontaneity.
Spontaneity and like we're talking about what keeps you excited in your job after decades and decades. And, you see this and in Scorsese and Spielberg's recent films too, where there's certain things that they do with the camera. I was like, I know that it was like, oh, I'm excited to try this. Like they're still finding things that, that excite them and, trying to find something new. And that's, to see that firsthand was very, very neat. And I felt like with Steven, I got to work on a unique project with him because he had to, or not had to, but he was doing a project where he wanted to pay homage to Kubrick, but it was also his vision too. It was a unique experience having Kubrick sort of permeating the project in that way. And I remember Steven saying at the very beginning of shooting, he was like, normally I'll do 2 or 3 takes. In honor of Stanley, I'll do up to 7 takes.
That is
like
funny.
That. Yeah. On a set like that where you have to manage hundreds of people working for you. And it's just like, oh, okay, I know what this feels like. I'm going to chase that if I ever get the chance to, have a fraction of that much responsibility in making a movie.
Yeah. You set it up nicely. Yeah. That's great. No.
I just worked on a film called Love with Beck Bennett and Chris Elliott, and our director was Thomas Leiston Schneider, and it's one of his first films. And I also love that in my most recent project, there were things I was learning from this director of the. He's fluent in English, but there's like a French flavor to the way that he would direct us. And both Beck and I were like, oh, wow, the economy of what he would say, of knowing when to have a detailed note and sometimes of just being like, not saying anything at all. And I was like, it's such a hard thing to describe, but each new project, you're just like, oh, okay. I'm remembering things that I did with directors 25 years ago that are influencing me. But on this project, it's like, oh, we're also finding each other's rhythm and I'm learning from that too. So it remains interesting every day you go to set.
Yeah. Directors that I remember were always open, that were in the zone or whatever. We're always open to spontaneity or some kind of inspiration once it was all assembled, if you will. Looking for that extra something, not just like hustling to make the day, but like relaxing in the moment of, because as you know, it's so hard to get a movie up and going and people's lives and schedules and transported and the sets built. And then you're finally there. And then if the rush of production is permeating the work, it's not great. You're just making shots and it's like, it can be good. And obviously more and more things are really tight, but people who know how to create that mood, like you're saying on the set, that's sort of a certain amount of ease, but also everybody's responsible and everybody knows you got to step it up and be open to like new shit. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Haley, Joel Osment, and Matt Walsh for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform. Be sure to check out all the great stuff on the Talkhouse Podcast Network. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.